Hello, everybody. Welcome to our second lecture in 2024. Sorry, not the second one. It's really because we thought to make a little bit fewer, but now it's the same as in the last year. So welcome. And today it's not on AI, but I think it's on an equally important issue. It is on the European digital identity system, which is also highly controversial. And there is really quite a commitment on part of the civil society and also part of the academia. Both have unified and had some joint letter against this proposal of the Commission. I'm now particularly grateful to welcome Thomas Lohninger. He's an expert in the field and who is also at the center of this debate, and he will explain us later on. The moderator of today is Erich Brehm, who will also introduce Thomas afterwards in some more detail. The choreography is, as always, 30 minutes talk, 30 minutes Q&A, and moderated by Erich. And at the end, we have again a piece of music, this time proposed by Thomas Lohninger. And now I'm happy to welcome Erich, our moderator of today. Erich doesn't need any introduction. The floor is yours.
Many thanks, Hannes. And it's indeed with great pleasure that we welcome Thomas Lohninger today. Thomas is Executive Director of the digital rights NGO epicenter.works in Vienna, here in Austria. Despite of that, I think we only met once. That tells you something about Vienna. But he's also with the Center of Internet and Society of the Stanford Law Schools, which holds him as a non-residential fellow. And he was senior fellow of the Mozilla Foundation, working on net neutrality in the European Union. This is a topic on which he actually worked a lot as a policy advisor for European Digital Rights, EDRI. And he's also serving on the board of EDRI. He has been since 2019. And he became vice president of the European Association in, I think, 2020. He has a background in information technology, but also, interestingly, in cultural and social anthropology. He's a frequent advisor to parliaments, for example, in Austria, in Germany, and also in Brussels. And if you look up his public speaking list, it is quite impressive. It demonstrates an impressive breadth of topics from IT security to the networked life, to net neutrality, mass surveillance, platform regulation, and many more topics. And with today, we add one more topics, and it's a great pleasure and honor to have Thomas with us. Thomas, the floor is yours. I know we need a minute or so to set up your screen, but please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I will start my screen share now and hope that you will now see the first slide with a title. Please identify yourself. And I am now also focusing on my keynote here. So please just raise your voice if there are any questions, or we maybe also keep the questions for the second half of the conversation. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the kind introduction. I'm coming from a digital rights NGO. So we've been doing the protection of fundamental rights in the digital age for over 14 years and started with data protection, anti-surveillance work, and always with a focus on the EU and increasingly also the United Nations. And I want to take the big European reform around digital identity as a starting point to also talk about these systems as a global trend. What we will start with is the basic premise of these systems, because this is really not something that originated in the European Union. If we look around the world, have similar systems in global majority countries where they have been around for much longer. And you can also find the relating policies from the World Bank and from the United Nations that aim for the proliferation of these systems. If you listen to the recent World Economic Forum in Davos, this was an issue. The topic has been mostly framed as under development aid and basically bringing more efficiency into government systems and particularly the accessibility of government services, government subsidies, and so forth. But these systems now also proliferate to Western countries. In Europe, we have the big reform that we'll talk about more. In the US, there are several state-level efforts that are well underway to bring identification and other means to smartphones. And all of this is also following Sustainable Development Goal target 16.9 to provide universal legal identity. And in today's days, these are meant as digital identity platforms. I want to start with the mother of all digital identity systems, and that's Aadhaar in India. This system, according to the most recent numbers, has around 1.14 billion people that are currently registered. And it might be interesting to note that the legal basis for the system was introduced at a point where almost 1 billion people were already onboarded. How does the system work? These are real slides from India, and to the right you also see the official government account for the Aadhaar system, where it is announced as something particularly tailored for children, and school children are also primary targets for the campaigns to sign people into these digital identity systems. And how do they work? You see here already a device being held up to the eyes of a child. That's because it's not just a photograph and all 10 fingerprints, it's also iris captures, which are the biometrical basis for the creation of a person in the Aadhaar system. So this is a biometrical identification system, and it is also, for all intents and purposes, equated with citizenship. At least there are many government functions, starting from subsidies to voting in an election, which are only possible once these digital identity systems are existent for a person. And again, according to official Indian documentation, the layer that we are talking about, this universal biometric identity, is just one of the 4 layers that are commonly referred to as so-called digital public infrastructure. And we will come back to this term at the end of this presentation. But digital public infrastructure also means a paperless layer, so easily storing and retrieving information, having a platform with which attributes about a person can be exchanged, both between the person and the government, but also with the private sector. A third layer is cashless, so digital payments, where we also have a pendant in Europe in the form of the digital euro, also something that we'll talk about a little bit later. And lastly, the consent layer. That is something that is very hard to bring together with the European data protection system according to the GDPR, because the consent layer would also allow data exchanges without the interaction of a person. So we are talking data trusts and similar systems that provide a legal way to exchange personal information between stakeholders. So much for the global perspective. Let's look closer at the European initiative. We have, since 2014, a European legal basis for digital identity. It's called the eIDAS regulation. The 2014 system is quite outdated. It is basically just a bilateral way to approve digital identity systems. So you could use your Danish ID to do your taxes in Austria. But it's really not much more than this bilateral acknowledgement, and then the possibility to identify yourself in country A with the identity of country B. This should all change with the current reform of the eIDAS regulation. It started in June of 2021 when the Commission proposed their reform of the underlying regulation. And we are now almost at the end of it. And we'll come to the timeline, but there is a stable legal text that was approved by Council and by the responsible committee in the European Parliament. We expect a plenary vote in early February. So that means this system is, for all intents and purposes, agreed upon by the European Union and will come into effect this decade. How does it work? The basic premise is that every European citizen or resident from any country will receive a European digital identity wallet, which is a smartphone app. And in this smartphone app, you will have various attributes They come from the government in part. They could be your national ID, your driver license, but they could also come from other public institutions like your university degree, or your age, or your vaccination status. And these are all real examples that are in the exploratory memorandum of the law. But they should also allow for the storage of information that comes from the private sector. Your hotel room keys, your customer royalty cards, your public transport cards, information relating to your bank account and your financial situation. And the system has four basic functions. It can authenticate a user to log into a service. It could identify the user vis-a-vis a public or private entity, verify attributes about them, and also sign documents in a legally binding way. And all these four functions can then be applied vis-a-vis a variety of stakeholders. This could be online platforms, banks, public transport companies, taxis, the police, hospitals, and so forth. So you see that on the left and on the right side, these are open-ended lists. The system is, for all intents and purposes, a universal infrastructure that is really open on both sides of the equation. And it allows to identify, authenticate, and verify attributes about any legal or natural person vis-a-vis the government or private sector in both online interactions and offline physical proximity interactions. According to the plans of the European Commission, they aim for a penetration of 80% of all citizens and residents of the EU by the end of this decade. One way to achieve this is that the law foresees all big tech platforms, so the very large online platforms, according to the Digital Services Act, Article 24, to be obliged to offer the wallet as a means to log into their service. So that means you will use, or you will have the opportunity to use, the government-issued identity by logging into Facebook or Google or Apple. And since very large online platforms late last year, this legal term by the EU was extended to also include pornography platforms with a user threshold of about 45 millions. So this in practice means that you'll also be able to use the government identity to log into Pornhub. And Pornhub will be forced to offer this to their users. This is not a voluntary regime. One basic problem that we see as data protection activists is that this one tool encompasses all areas of life. It is one system that should be applicable for the most secure use cases, like logging into your bank, doing your taxes, but also identifying you before you get a SIM card from your telephone provider, in case you live in a country where you need to register in order to get a SIM card. It can be used to buy cigarettes or do any type of e-commerce. And we most likely will also see it in the pay or okay banners that we right now have in most news platforms in Europe. Because it would be quite questionable if we don't see the advertisement industry to use this system for some purposes. And of course, you have the big tech platforms and financial scoring companies like KSV or Schufa in Germany that might also play a role in this ecosystem. Focusing more on the risks, and again, looking first at the global majority countries. In India, we had, according to newspaper investigations, around 210 data leaks since 2017. And we see a lot of the data that is in the Aadhaar system being used in ways in which it shouldn't be. And that mostly is because of the decentralized nature of the data storage. There is one central, national, federal system, but then there are also local mirror databases. And those were the targets of several security breaches, and hence this data proliferated. That wouldn't be possible in a European system because the data is really stored on the smartphone. But of course, every exchange that you do with the data creates a copy. And that copy rests with the relying party, with the private or public entity that you shared it with. And it contains also the cryptographic keys to verify its authenticity. So that again creates certain risks. Unique risk for India is that there are also private sector companies now that provide, like here, advertisements for biometrical and facial recognition software. Again, the European system, in our version of the law, in the version that the European Parliament adopted in first reading, would have seen a prohibition to not force people to use biometrics so that you could also use the system without giving any biometricals away. Sadly, that did not make it into the final legal text. And in India, the debate, again, is a way to look at the future. And one of the founders of these systems recently rebutted critique by saying a Tao is now part of culture. It's done deal. So now it's yesterday's battle. Meaning and referring to the fact that even civil society, while still very much troubled by the effects of Qatar, getting these systems taken offline seems an unrealistic prospect. And we will later also talk about actually what's next for India, because a lot of the work is now exporting these types of systems under the realm of digital public infrastructure. But it's not just India. Our sister organization, Privacy International, also reported many of the pitfalls and exclusions that were created by the systems in Uganda and Kenya. Uganda and Kenya are very interesting data points because the systems there were also quite tuned in with biometrical recognition. And again, they equated the existence of a person in these systems with this person having a citizenship. And that, of course, was extremely troublesome because statelessness is something that all nations of the world agreed to no longer let happen. But yet these systems have this as an unintended, I would hope, side effect. And even within Europe, we have the case of Mr. San Juan, a pensioner in Spain that started this change.org petition, which got, I think, over 800,000 signatures, basically saying that although he is a senior citizen and might not be the well-versed in technology, banks shouldn't prohibit him from obtaining services, from getting hold of his own money. But the Spanish banking system back at the day was set up in a way that made it almost impossible to even get an appointment without using the smartphone app. And that actually led to some changes in the way in which Spain is now, I mean, it's only a soft law, but there are at least some rules in terms of accessibility of financial services for senior citizens. And we will come back to the stakeholder group as being an important group in the debate in the European Parliament as well. Lastly, a good frame with which we try to make lawmakers in the European process understand these risks is the risk of over-identification. Right now, we have many daily interactions, both physical and virtual, that we can do in anonymity or with pseudonymity by using another name that's not our legal name. But with these systems, suddenly we could find ourselves in many situations where this anonymity is stripped away from us, where we are forced to give our real legal name with the cryptographic signature that it is correct. No longer paper forms where we can do a little spell check to see who has actually given our data away. It will all be the truth and nothing but the truth if we're not careful. And there might also be many situations where the ease with which a person can exchange data about themselves leads to another form of over-identification risk by a hotel checking, suddenly asking for family status and financial situation, or a restaurant requiring the legal name for a table reservation. And border control agents suddenly using these systems to get more information about whoever intends to cross. And of course, in many of these situations, saying no is not really an option, and solely relying on consent, on the user clicking yes or no, is not really a sufficient safeguard for the power dynamics that play. And now I think is a good time to talk about safeguards and whether they are enough. And we can also now look at the outcome of the European reform with what's to come. Let me start with the good stuff. So from all the safeguards that we co-developed at the Parliament, the one we're most proud of or have the most trust is the right to non-discrimination. We actually managed in Article 6A, 7A to establish in the European regulation for all levels of society and commerce that there cannot be any discrimination or hindrance for people that are not using these digital identity system. So you cannot be asked to pay a higher price. You cannot be refused a service simply for not using this system. And this right does not only encompass access to government services like subsidies or the job centers, it also extends to the labor market and our employers. It also extends to the freedom to conduct business and thereby to the whole private sector. And that is an extremely powerful stopgap measure, even if all other safeguards might fail. A second big win is that we could prevent the establishment of a unique lifelong identifier, basically a serial number for people that was actually in the law in Article 11a. And as you can imagine, if the system legally mandates big tech to use it, they would be very happy to have a super cookie that helps them identify a person across all areas of life. With such a unique persistent identifier that stays with you your whole life, it's very easy to connect things from your social media history, from your health records, financial records, your justice records, all of your employers' data, and suddenly get a real panoptical view about a person. And this panoptical view is one of the biggest risks, given that this is a ubiquitous infrastructure that is supposed to pop up in all areas of society. The third safeguard I want to mention is the right to pseudonymity. In Article 5, we actually managed to enshrine in the law that whenever there is no legal mandate to identify a person, you have a right to use pseudonyms. Those pseudonyms can also be locally stored and freely chosen by the user. And I am very happy that this is a way to also use the system for online services. We really don't want this European system to be the way in which Facebook finally enforces its real name policy. Next, zero knowledge proofs. That is a very technical thing that comes handy in practice. What it means is you are able to prove that a fact or a question about you is true without handing over the underlying information. The most common example, you have to prove that you are above 18 years old, and you do so without giving away your birthday. Those are zero knowledge proofs. They are very standard procedure now in cryptography, and they are also one of the features of the wallet that the law prescribes. And next, the right for unlinkability. So again, whenever identification is not mandatory and you verify an attribute about yourselves, let's say I'm a resident of this street or of this part of the country or the town, then you can do so without giving the relying party, the other side, anything that can link back to you. So you would be able to verify something about yourselves, come back the next day, and they wouldn't know that you are the same person. And it wouldn't simply be true for that relying party. Even if company A buys company B, or they exchange data in some other way, they wouldn't be able to correlate user behavior across interactions. That's an extremely helpful safeguard. Yeah, and the last safeguard that was really the hardest one we had to fight for. The industry really fought like hell, but I'm happy to say that we won, is use case regulation. So any form of private company, of relying party that wants to use this system needs to go to the national eIDAS authority, register their use case with the concrete things that they want to do. Like I want to check in people from my hotel and hand them out their hotel room key as attributes in the wallet. Or I want to, I'm a telco, I need to know who my customers are. Then they can do that, but they need to specify the use case and they need to specify the data they intend to ask from people. So you cannot on an individual basis go beyond and ask for more information than what's in your registration. And the whole list of companies that have registered in this ecosystem is public for scrutiny by academics, by civil society, by consumer groups, and so forth. So that's a very important safeguard. And now for the good stuff, let's look at the bad. So the biometrical requirement, I touched on that, is not in the law. So we don't have a safeguard that prevents, like the Austrian government currently does with ID Austria, to say, oh, you want to use the government system? Oh, no problem. Just use the biometrics on your phone. Mind you that these are not centrally stored biometrics. They are using the secure enclave chips on the smartphone to store the facial recognition scan or the fingerprints. They are not transmitted to a government database, and they are not provisioned onto the device from existing biometrical databases that are in existence because of the passports that we hold with biometrics. But still, we see this in the countries where these systems exist, that it creates a backlash. Many people just don't want to use their biometrics in a government-run app. And so that is still a risk that's out there. The second one is the panoptical risk. And this is not just unlinkability. It is really the possibility by architecture to observe user behavior. Is the issuing authority of the wallet, so the government, able to observe the transactions that are conducted within the system? Are they able to observe when you go to the doctor, when you pay with this wallet, when you use it to log into Facebook, when you use it to do public transport? Because if these transactions are visible from a macroscopic perspective from the government, then you really have a panopticon. Then you could, with enough proliferation, obtain knowledge about all areas of a person's life. We pressed extremely hard to get some final fixes into the law, and we managed to get it into the recitals, not in the articles of the law, which means that it will all come down to the technical implementation. And I will touch on that later, but yeah, the verdict is still out whether it will have an observability or not. There are some muddy parts, we call them ugly, so things where the law is not as clear as it should be. One primary question concerns IT security. So smartphones have varying degrees of IT security. Some smartphones are easier or harder to hack, and some vendors, particularly the cheap phones, are easier to hack because they don't get regular security updates, for example. And that means the most vulnerable that might already struggle to operate modern smartphones safely are also the ones most at risk by being the target of attacks. And once an attacker has obtained access over the wallet, an interesting fact happens. Right now under consumer protection law, if you are a party to a contract and you say, no, I actually didn't sign that, the burden of proof lies with the company to prove that you actually have a contract with them. Here, these are cryptographically signed contracts, so the math proves that they are right. It's now on the consumer to prove that they were not in control of their smartphone when that signature happened. And of course, if you think about the span in which this system will be used for many areas of life that seemingly are right now unconnected, any downtime of the central system could really have devastating consequences. Imagine people no longer being able to use the subway or communicating with the government or logging into Facebook or doing banking. Suddenly a downtime of a few hours, let alone a few weeks, becomes a very critical incident. Next, open source. And here it's important to say that we do have a weak obligation of the government to provide the application source code openly available to the public, but it's not free software and it does not concern the backend, and there are security exceptions so that for security reasons, parts or the whole application repository could be kept closed, which is not a way to inspire trust. And another important safeguard that I want to mention here, because again, looking outside of Europe, the colleagues in Kenya have done such a tremendously good job with suing against these systems. And the government really had to halt their plans in light of these high court decisions. And this gives hope in terms of what the application of these systems to all areas of life will also mean. Think back about the non-discrimination provision that relates also to the employers. I hope that unions will have an important role to play here. So last thing that I want to talk with you about is what's next and where this all leads and what's the timetable. So right now we are one step away for the adoption of the European system. This body, the plenary of the European Parliament, has to decide on the 6th of February in the second reading whether they adopt the text or no. And practically speaking, there's a 99% chance that this will go through and that we will see no further changes to the law. If that happens, then by August of this year, we can expect the implementing acts that will further specify details of the law, including the technical implementation, where all of the ambiguity, particularly as it concerns the unobservability question, will be answered with concrete technical specifications. After this point, the wallet can be offered by any member states to their citizens and residents, and at 2026, by the latest, we have an obligation for all member states to offer the wallet to their citizens. And again, there is this EIDAS expert working group that will come up for the technical implementations. And that's also a very opaque body where only industry and public officials are present. But we have stable leaks, and we are also working on analyzing the most recent drafts of the technical specifications here. I want to pause again and say that the European digital identity system is just one piece of the jigsaw puzzle. I, at the beginning of this presentation, talked about the concept of digital public infrastructure. That is an alien term in Europe, but it fits very neatly on the legislation that we have seen proposed by this European Commission. We have a regulation for European health data space that basically obliges the wallet to be the tool to go to the doctor, to the pharmacy, to the hospital. We have a mobile driving license directive that provides a legal basis for electronic driver licenses that, of course, will happen on the wallet. We have a proposal for digital euro that, again, will happen in the wallet. So not just all our data, also our money will be in this one app. And lastly, we have legislation like the Child Sexual Abuse Regulation, or chat control, which is obliging all types of online platforms to do age verification to protect minors. There aren't that many good ways to do age verification, actually, and most of them are expensive. This new system suddenly is free and government certified. So it might be a chosen tool to have age verification done with these means. I mentioned the UN earlier and India's role in that. The UN Tech Envoy has this project called DPI-safeguards.org, which is something I would really like this community to focus their attention on. The deadline for submission and nomination of experts is in part already passed. Others are still open until late January. And this global initiative of the United Nations aims to create safeguards for the provisioning of digital public infrastructure systems. And we are heavily trying now to export safeguards that I've outlined earlier to the worldwide debate and United Nations. And the timetable of the UN is quite ambitious for this year. So you can expect a lot of activity on the UN level here in the coming months. To conclude, there are 4 axes of resistance against these systems that have proven to work. The first is advocacy, talking about it, working on the law, expressing interests by a diverse group of stakeholders, bringing facts to the table, experiences, particularly from the global south, looking at the risks and coming up with solutions. That was our job in the last 2 years. I hope it's not done. I hope we made enough progress to continue along these legislative files and all of the implementation work that will happen in the next years. At least my work since the pandemic has been heavily focused on what we call digital public infrastructure. Second, hacking. As we've seen in Germany, this system could be already in pilot mode and having the data of thousands of people, and then suddenly you find out that there are security flaws in the architecture and the whole thing has to be called off. So hacking, exposing security vulnerabilities, of course, under the paradigm of responsible disclosure, is a very efficient way to show the pitfalls in these systems, hopefully before they get live. Third, protest. You've seen on some pictures in India, we had millions on the street. And there was actually a huge backlash against the Aadhaar system. Similarly in Kenya. I mean, they also tied these systems to the accessibility of government subsidies and food subsidies. But nevertheless, I see a lot of potential also when I speak with our constituency in Austria as a data protection NGO for people to care, for people to really want to have a say in the creation of these systems. And that's our hope. And lastly, strategic litigation. So several fundamental rights are at stake if you digitize access to government services, access to freedom to conduct business and the labor market. And so having strategic litigation as a tool when these systems do harm is a very important backstop measure. And on that note, I'm very much looking forward to your questions and our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thomas, thank you very much. Much appreciated. Great talk. I think it proves both the excellence of your work that you're doing. I think we should really be grateful for your initiative. And it also shows how important it is that people with background knowledge in computer science talk about these things. Because, I mean, in many cases, we would have some better solutions. There could be safeguards. You mentioned some of them, but we also need to get them out and make sure that they're actually used and so on and so forth. I would like to give the floor to Moshe, who was the first to put his hand up. Moshe, please.
Fantastic talk, Thomas. Really fantastic talk. I want to do an analogy when we have all these digital services, online services we have to use, and we have to come up with passwords. People came up with the idea of using password managers. And there were a lot of enthusiasm in the beginning because it's really hard to keep track of passwords and people repeat passwords. But now I'm seeing the enthusiasm for password manager is declining because people realize they're putting all the passwords in one place, and if this place is now become very high value target, so people are putting much more effort to break into password managers, and if they do, everything is up. All of your online connections are open. I mean, once you have this kind of idea of your digital wallet, this is incredibly. Now we're going to have state actors, trying to say, can we break that system? And to me, the prospect of this system broken into is just utterly scary.
Yes, I mean, you're rightfully touching on that. And these wallets are serving a dual function because they can be used as passkeys. So you could use them either as a second factor or as a means to logging into an application in the first place. And for the majority of users that solely rely on one password, that of course is a huge improvement in practical terms. But any good IT security analysis needs to be mindful of the threat model, and this is a government-issued app, and it is a single point of failure for many other systems as well. And so this really comes down to the individual threat model, and I am a big fan of hardware security keys. I have one in front of me right here. And I think that these are, this is an educational question to increase the security level of all. We do have an Epicenter Academy in which we do these trainings with teachers and school children and administrative academies. Having a government-issued password manager in the form of these European digital identity wallets also has the problem, and now I'm touching on the IT security risk. The law foresees the possibility for the government to suspend and revoke a wallet. So with the simple order, the government could prevent the wallet from being functional in both the public and the private sector. And if the security threats or vulnerabilities persist, they could also choose to completely revoke the license of the wallet. And that also means that it would be completely unfunctional, and all the information contained within might be able to be backed up. But then the restore would have to happen in another wallet because that government-issued wallet would no longer be able to function in this ecosystem.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to George, let me read out one question that was in the chat. Thanks for your great talk. How confident are you that the right to non-discrimination might not sometimes be undermined? Many users seem to be willing to use services that ask for or use more data than what is actually required just out of convenience. For many people, it seems to be too much effort to switch to an analog identification method only for taking care of data privacy, for example.
Yeah, I mean, that is a great question. This right is enshrined in the regulation on the EU level. That means it was applicable to all member states and also to individual state representatives and so forth. And right now we see, for example, in my country, in Austria, discrimination happening for particular job groups. If you are a teacher, then in order to get your job I don't know how the word loan settle can be translated into English. Basically, the paper that states what the employer has paid you in this month. And if you want to get that, and most likely you do, then you need ID Austria. You need the government issued system, and there's no alternative. These are clear-cut cases that would be illegal under the new system. But of course, you need to litigate those. And we intentionally written this right as something that non-discrimination groups, unions, data protection groups, consumer groups can litigate on individual cases. There are no penalties subscribed, but it would be a violation of EU law, so it should be a clear-cut case. Then, speaking about alternatives, that is actually a very interesting question where we see a variety of things. And proving your age, for example, is a very commonplace thing that public broadcasters take quite seriously, because we do have European legislation that obliges all media companies to actually check their age. And enter your birthday here, like we know from most websites, of course, is not a sufficient age verification check mark. And that leads to a quite diverse range of alternative solutions. And we definitely need to have a debate on which of those are most favorable from a human rights perspective and from an accessibility perspective as well.
Thanks, Thomas. George is next. George, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Thomas. This was the clearest presentation on this subject that I have ever heard. And I would like to ask you to amplify on one of the positive features you meant, or good, you call them. Moshe went to a negative one, so I want to go to a positive one, and that is the zero knowledge proof, which is very important and an improvement on the current situation. Because now when you hand out your ID or your passport to prove your age, as you use that example, you also give out a hell of a lot of additional information that you might not want to. How flexible, how easy will, practically speaking, will this zero knowledge proof usage be? Will it be like the older work of token-based authentication, for example? You have to get some sort of token. How will it work in practice?
So right now, as the law is now almost concluded, we know that there is this obligation for the wallet to enable zero knowledge whenever you are not obliged to identify yourself. How this will be solved technically is exactly the work that will now happen in the EIDAS expert working group and then become legally binding with the delegated act by the European Commission. So the technical specification, we don't know yet, but it is something that I would love to also have more input from people in this community to get a work on, because as you can imagine, this is a technical standard. This needs scrutiny from a technical community. We do have some partners here, but I would always be happy to extend it. And we are also talking with colleagues in the US that are, for example, looked at the ISO mobile driving license standard to get them into this debate, because we believe that Europe might be setting an important standard here. On the practicality of zero knowledge, because I think that was also your question. I mean, there are the birthday example is the easy one. If you then combine attributes like, are you a resident of that area and a senior citizen and maybe something else, it does get a little bit trickier. Yeah. And the thing is, we right now, when I speak with experts that are also in the W3C or that worked on the ISO standards, they tell me honestly, like, we hope that we will have those standards, but right now we don't. Like, not on a production level to rolling it out for millions of people. So that's a hard bargain that the European Commission has entered into. Would I strip away the privacy safeguards for that? No, because I feel like if we cannot deliver the system safely to citizens, then we shouldn't deliver it at all. But there's definitely now an interesting timeline, to say the least, when it comes to actually bringing this down to a functioning technical specification. And our job as civil society, and I think we are all in agreement here also with the academia, is also to tell the government, actually, no, this will not work in practice. Or there are unforeseen risks if this scales. The next months before the Commission has to adopt the implementing act are definitely the crucial time period to raise these concerns.
Thanks, Thomas. There is a person using the pseudonym Leopold Seeker who asks whether, so the problems are clear, how could a better system design look like without some of these design flaws? And let me add maybe to this question, I mean, as we have seen in the AI Act, for example, there is certainly a lot that will only be detailed when all of this gets implemented and when all of the details. So maybe you can also add what you expect us, academia or digital humanists or whoever's listening, between when the law is actually, when the act gets decided upon until it's fully, fully rolled out, what do you expect us to do?
So the most fundamental work that we all need to do is conveying to the wider public why this is a human rights issue, why this is not simple technology that's just, yeah, there's this app from the government, I click here and then it does something. There are very clear human rights implications because these systems include and exclude certain parts of society. They come with a power dynamic because they are kill switches. There are real world applications of these systems in power dynamics with a work contract, with access to situations where you simply cannot rely on the person clicking no because they have to click yes. Making that understood is definitely the foundational issue. The second one is looking into your own countries, because we do have a quite diverse starting point when it comes to digital ID systems in the EU and in the wider world. There are now global networks of academics and civil society. The Global ID Coalition is one of them, where we try to connect. Colleagues of mine are now meeting in February at Kuala Lumpur at the World Statelessness Conference to have exactly these types of discussions. Like being part of the discussion on a global level is helpful. And if you do have the capacity to really work under the extreme stress, but the huge reward of working on the EU system that will be applicable for 420 million people, not counting the Brussels effect, because this thing will be exported, then using the next months to work on the technical standard. And that's something that like we have taken a primary interest in, to really try to help the Commission do good by the law and bring this into a working technical standard. That's certainly something where more hands are needed. And then lastly, the DPI safeguards process. Again, like the first deadline has already passed, but the second deadline is still up for, it's the 31st of January, if I remember correctly. And giving that more attention. I am not convinced about good intentions, but I mean, something that says it wants to create safeguards deserves our attention and our support. So let's see whether the UN actually really tries to bring something ambitious forward here.
Maybe a short follow-up question. How happy are you with the debate so far, also in terms of what the public talks about? Is because I mean, everybody's talking about AI. There's a lot in the media. I haven't seen much about EIDAS, and I think I'm already biased.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking with someone who has done digital rights for over 14 years, and I started before Assange was known. So, I mean, I come from a niche issue, and I am happy that we get more and more attention, but certainly not the attention it deserves, particularly from the groups that are most affected. And the problem with European lawmaking is also that it's always behind the horizon, it's always far away. So I certainly, over the past year, had much more media requests about national systems than the European system, which is so crazy because the European system will supersede everything. So that's the general problem. If you work on European lawmaking, Brussels seems to be on a different planet and not just a train ride away. But I of course, think that this is a hugely important issue. Otherwise, I wouldn't be working on it. And the more people that talk about it, the foundational work that we achieve hopefully also prevents people from having certain types of problems.
Fantastic, Thomas. Hannes is next. Hannes, please.
Thank you, Thomas, for your presentation and very clear talk. I have a, let's say, on an upper level, on a meta level, I have a very uneasy feelings. Okay, we are building an electronic infrastructure with all the data digitized. We uncover the data, we store them electronically, decentralized or centralized, and we are acting now in a democratic society, more or less, in different countries, more in different others not. But what will happen, and I now have a dystopian view, okay? We're having Trump in the US, we're having movements to the right in Europe, we have a change in political systems where all this data, all this infrastructure, well prepared, can be misused. And we have seen in history how data, let's say the Nazis were so successful because many of the data were already stored not electronically, but on paper. So they could really use directly the data on our Jewish population. So can you share something of this dystopian view? I have now, hopefully it's only it does not become true, but I really have an uneasy feeling on this level because we are working on a very technical level. We are looking, having different safeguarding measures, but yeah.
So
a total opposition, what would this be? Just like a machine stürmer position? Shouldn't we do that? But it's really on, I think on where the society goes at the moment, and don't we prepare something which can be heavily misused?
So our whole work on this file on ADAS was driven by this unease and in clear light of the risks of this system being abused, being used against particularly vulnerable groups of society, and having this be a level of control that is unprecedented in liberal democratic societies. So our job is only done well if we prevent these risks in the architecture. That's why we wanted unobservability. That's why we want use case regulation with public scrutiny. And whether that was enough at the end is a very open question, you know. And the problem is also that the foundation can only be as good as the bad intentions of the implementing party. Aadhaar in India does not contain caste or religion as an attribute, but where you use it kind of shows that anyway, you know. And if you do have the one number that represents a person, making lists of people is actually much easier. And so there is a reason why certain categories of data are under particular protection. And yes, that stems out of the whole history. We as Austrian Hollerith machines, we know that. And I feel like that shows also drive our work on modern systems. And we also thought about the Maschinenstürmer, the total opposition perspective, you know. And you know what the argument of the Commission was when they announced this in June 2021, which is, if you think back, the pandemic was still fresh in everybody's mind. People started to really like doing things in front of their computers instead of going outside. And their main argument was, we need to be early because if we don't do it, Facebook will. And in Europe, that is a very strong driving factor to say that we need a European alternative. The same argument is now also used with the digital euro. Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, all American companies, we need a European system. And there are really two hearts in my mind. Of course, I would prefer for these foundational infrastructures to be public and democratically decided. and not the product of one company. But then again, the risk of governments abusing these systems is also much larger. So that is the tension that is not just in this issue, but also in the digital euro, it was in the vaccination stuff, in the contact tracing. And I think it is one of the big foundational questions that I hope also this group here can continue to discuss, because I feel like it will pop up more and more.
Thank you, Thomas. I think this brings us more or less to the end of this discussion. I would also like to say that there have been very positive comments on your talk in the chat, and you posted some papers and the link to the epicenter.works website, and I guess you also have links to partner institutions throughout Europe or maybe even internationally that people can find there. Is that a way? Would that be a way to go for people who are interested?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, we are happy to serve as a contact point. You can find our phone numbers and email addresses there. And we, of course, are also on social media, have German and English speaking newsletters. So there are ways to follow our work. We, like 80% of what we do is very closely tied to legislation, either on the EU, UN, or some parts of the national level. But we really are a no bullshit, completely independent, human rights focused organization. So, and if there are overlaps in the work areas, we'd be happy to cooperate. We are part of EDRI. I'm the vice president of EDRI, which is the European network of all, or almost all, over 45 digital rights NGOs in the European Union. And yeah, I am happy to collaborate with academia. We have done since our founding, and we are also living off donations. We get half of our money from individual small donations and the other half from grants, and do a lot of work wherever we see that we can make a difference.
Great, brilliant. I hope we could help a little bit. Thomas, thanks for your talk. Those of you who don't know it, we always close our lectures with a piece of music. Today it's something, Thomas, you selected. It's a song by or a piece of music rather by Marcin Sibilovic. Yeah, I think it's Sibilovic is the way to pronounce it. Cyberpunk 2077, and I believe Walter is going to start the music. You will also see a link, a slide to our next event there. The next event will be on February 13. It's by Daron Acemoglu from MIT Economics, and he talks on power and progress. Moderator will be Moshe Vardi from Rice University. Very much looking forward to it. Thanks to Thomas. There's the music. Go ahead.
One additional hint, Erich. Next time we will start at 6 p.m. and not 5 p.m. Sorry for this short interruption.
Thank you. Music.
all the best. No, it's not finished yet. Sorry.
I think it's finished, and maybe there was some audio problem. It is a piece of the game Cyberpunk 2077. Actually, a lot of I find the whole sci-fi literature and cyberpunk universe and also role-playing games personally quite inspirational for the digital rights work, and so that's the reason for choosing that particular piece. And I think besides the audio problem that we just had, you can also easily find the whole soundtrack of that game online, and you might find yourself in the world of cyberpunk increasingly.
Thank you, Thomas, and we see you next time. Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.